Hello there and welcome to part 11 of You're Being Shaped, which is a series of videos I'm doing on Vance Packards' book The People Shapers. In the last video I mentioned briefly about animal husbandry. That was the section I was reading in the previous chapter. Basically applying animal husbandry to humans, solving infertility problems and things like that, artificial insemination, creating sperm banks and things like that, which has already happened. This connects to the next chapter, which is called Starting Man in a Test Tube. And as I say, I've underlined the things that I think are relevant, and I try not to waffle on too much, even though I do. It goes in. It talks about vitro fertilisation, which I'm sure you know what that is. Test tube babies. That was a nickname for it. So I won't go into too much detail there. Talks here about the first animals created in test tubes during the 1950s and 60s. Said it took a while for researchers to find out the right nutrients that they needed. So that they would actually survive. And in a Brave New World, they had that figured out, didn't they? Stage by stage, bit by bit, they were feeding them substances and extractions and hormones from other animals at the right stage at the right time, and to keep them alive and developed how they wanted them to be, basically. This is a little section, least and artificial wombs. Basically non-human wombs, growing humans in non-human wombs, transplanting the embryo of another woman into a infertile woman, so that she can grow a baby, and or vice versa. I think getting the egg, fertilising it, and transplanting it into a healthy woman with a womb. That works. Womb transplants, things like that, I think. And here is a little section in the chapter, the Hatchery Approach. Let's read this for in Huxley's new novel, A Brave New World, new humans were decanted in vast hatcheries. One of the characters chuckled about the quaint old days of the 20th century, where humans were still born by viviparous reproduction, and that's the old-fashioned way in the womb. And then he goes on to Huxley's way of doing things, as just mentioned, in artificial wombs. And here's a chap, a Italian embryologist, who basically grew an embryo in an artificial type womb. The Italian embryologists, like Edwards and Shettles, he was not trying to keep an embryo growing long enough, which is 4 to 5 days, to attempt an implant in a natural womb. He was apparently just letting the embryo keep growing in an artificial womb. This womb substitute, according to one account, was a silicone container filled with fluid withdrawn by syringe from the wombs of pregnant women. One embryo allegedly grew for 29 days, at which point a heartbeat was discernible. So that's real ectogenesis going on there. It says here the Russians expressed the hope that they would give birth to mankind's first totally laboratory gestated human within the next few years, but that still hasn't happened yet, or so we are told anyway. Experiments with mice in artificial wombs being kept alive. The problem of artificial gestation, it reads here, whether with mouse or man are monumental. Aside from deceiving the early embryo into believing it is embedded in the lining of a real womb, experimenters must produce in the artificial womb a fluid with continually changing ingredients that are similar to those found in a real womb during the days of gestation. The wrong amount of a single ingredient, if given only for a few days, could reduce a potential genius into a certain imbecile. And that was all mentioned in Julian Huxley's work, isn't it? How they had them on this kind of process step by step when they were feeding them extractions from other animals and things like that at the right time. And there's a little mention again of Huxley here. In Huxley's imaginary laboratories, the baby makers varied nutrients depending on what brand of human the regime wanted to produce at that particular time. There we are. And you read about a French biologist, Jean Rostand. He saw the kangaroo's reproductive pattern as a possible model for humans, since in humans the early weeks of gestation are proving to be by far the most difficult to manage outside the womb and are the most error-prone. He suggested that we adopt the marsupial approach. The human mother would undergo a normal pregnancy for a few months. At that point, she would be chemically stimulated to go into labour and discharge the fetus. This fetus would go into an artificial womb or incubator. An alternative would be to surgically lift out the fetus. So, yeah, that's a step towards ectogenesis, isn't it? It's a step towards non-viviparous, if I pronounce that right, reproduction. This other section, males or females to order, talks about how we can have control over what sex the child is, or how scientists can have control over that. Talks about the X chromosome and the XY chromosome and all of that. There was a chapter in Julian Huxley's Essays in Popular Science that covered that as well, that I went over in the previous videos. The quality control of new humans. Now I think we're moving into the eugenics side of things again. Let's read on this. In the opinion of H. Bentley Glass, the geneticist, leaders of the future will decree that parents have no right to burden society with a malformed or mentally incomplete child. Future societies, he states, will regulate who gets born and who does not. If nothing else, population pressures will make regulation inevitable, and he adds, the once sacred rights of man must change in many ways. Changes will come mainly through eugenic engineering. Eugenics is the name of the long-discussed movement to improve the human species through the control and manipulation of hereditary factors. This can be done without working directly on individual genes. As we've seen, the direct manipulation of genes is still quite a problem. And the positive ones of that is having people that aren't born with really bad kind of genetic, unfortunate, malfunctions like clubfoot and dwarfism and things like that, and even diabetes and things like that. So it's improving the stock. That's possible positive benefits of that. Here it mentions in this chapter screening by genetic counsellors. It says here, in 1951 there were only 10 known genetic counsellors in the United States. Today there are at least 1,000. They can be found in hundreds of genetic counselling centres, and bear in mind this was in the 70s, so I take it things have increased since then. A little bit here on the Catholic Church when it says movement of the fetus. Movement of the fetus. A common Protestant view is that life begins with a quickening, that is, when the pregnant woman feels or notices fetal movement. The Catholic Church during the Middle Ages permitted abortions prior to fetal quickening. I guess I mentioned that because of the how the Roman Catholic Church represented the old establishment, the old order, and the scientific one is the new kind of new order of how human beings are going to be controlled and all of that. There's a section here called negative eugenics. Thus far, it reads, we have been talking about individual actions to reduce the chance of having a seriously defective child. Eugenic counselling certainly is laudable. An individual decision to abort fetuses that fetal monitoring has provided to be seriously defective can be argued as morally defensible. So yeah, going now into negative eugenics, but what about compulsory broad-scale programs to prevent the conception of defective babies or to identify fetuses with poor genetic endowments? I am not talking about Hitlerian programs to kill off the defective and the weak at birth. I am talking about compulsory counselling, compulsory sterilisation, denial of the right to reproduce without a licence, and mass screening of newborns to spot those that are defective. These add up to negative eugenics, so that's negative eugenics there. And Julian Huxley discussed that in his book Essays in Popular Science, which I discussed in previous videos. Here it says, is the headline, is the human gene pool deteriorating? ? And it says a number of well-known biologists have answered yes. They include Sir Julian Huxley, Bentley Glass, as we just mentioned. Moving on, mass screening at birth. So that ties into that, eugenics there. Mentions here about the XYY person. This is a male that they say that if they have an extra Y chromosome in them, because most males apparently have an XY chromosome, and if you have an XYY, they say you statistics in this say that they're more criminally minded, they could be more violent. Not always, but there's a tendency, and they were doing genetic screening on prisoners to find out if that was the case, and they say that there were actually a high potential of high rates of XYY males in prisons, but whether that's true or not, don't know. That's interesting though. Other approaches to weeding out defective humans, talks about encouraging sterilisation and things like that with people with serious genetic defects. And let's continue on in the next video.